Hi there, and welcome to the show. I'm thrilled to welcome our first guest for the year, Topaz Pauls from right here in Edinburgh. Topaz is one of those creatives who brings people together. She runs Reconfigure, a local life drawing group, while also working as a model and creating her own art. In our conversation, we explore how she balances multiple creative practices, the power of community in sustaining creative work, and what it means to be both subject and creator. I loved speaking with her, and I think you'll find so much to take away from this episode. Hi, Topaz. Thanks for
Hello.
being on the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's so lovely to have a conversation with you today. And before we start, can you give a very brief intro as to who you are and what it is that you do?
Um, I've got many strings to my bow, but and it depends kind of how much of one thing I'm doing at any one time as to how I kind of list off what I do. So at the moment, I'm mostly a life drawing facilitator, and then also a life model, and then also a baker and support worker, and also an artist.
Wow. I love how you
Yeah.
said that the order changes depending
Hmm.
on what it is that you're busy with at the moment. And
Uh-huh.
I think that's the case for so many creatives. That's we're often working on many different projects and can work in many different settings.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah. So I want to ask you a question that I ask everyone at the start of the episode usually is when did you know that you're a creative? Is that something that's always been with you and that you always were aware of, or was there a moment in time? Can you pinpoint a moment where it became a little bit more evident?
It's always it's it's been, let's say, it's been not even a question for my whole life.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Hmm.
there was never a time where I felt like that wasn't who I was,
Hmm.
and I have a fairly unshakable feeling that no matter how little of my own work that I do sometimes, it's still who I am. Yeah.
It's a beautiful way of saying it. And so this year, as far as I understand, you're celebrating 10 years of doing Reconfigure, which is the local life drawing group, and I'm so grateful that I can get to be a part of it as well. So I was very curious about where that started. How did you start doing Reconfigure?
Yeah, it will be well, it kind of depends where you mark the beginning point because it kind of started as an idea. Um, this summer 2026, it will be 10 years since the sort of inception of it, if you like. And then a few months later, it found its home in Summerhall in the start of 2017. So it started off because working as a model, I and also running someone else's life drawing night at the time, I felt like I had more ideas and more things that I wanted to explore than perhaps traditional kind of quite sort of Spartan life drawing rooms had space for. Um, and I think being quite stubborn um, and I don't know how to put it, difficult to work with in some ways. It just became clear that I needed to have my own platform, if you like, to explore these things. I had a lot of friends who were either models or physical theatre performers, and I had a lot of energy for generating creative ideas of experiencing life drawing in a slightly unusual way, where the model became more of a performer than a kind of passive object. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so that's how that began. Yeah.
Hmm. Thanks for sharing. And how has it evolved over the years? Has it evolved in some
Mm.
way, or is it still very much true to your original idea?
Well, I think it definitely has evolved. It used to be that I had the energy to put on a different kind of quite elaborate sometimes theme every single session, and that has changed and it's become much more stripped back. There is still a sense of the sessions being. I never try and put any model in a kind of box, if you like. Let's put it in a different way. I never try and impose my own idea of how they should move their body. Even though, of course, I I have things that poses or types of poses that I prefer and that inspire me more. But anyway, it's all still very much in the hands of the models as to what actually they do when it comes to stepping out the front there in front of everybody. But yeah, I don't have the energy or the time, what with all my other jobs, to do all the themes anymore. And I thought, does it mean that people won't come? But that's not true. They're still flocking.
Absolutely.
And it doesn't mean that it won't happen again or it can't ever happen again. So I mean, it's just sort of there in the background. I might spring something on people every now and then if I have a funny little idea or the model comes to me with something that they would like to explore. But that's how it's changed. It's less of a kind of theatrical performance. It's more simple, I suppose. Yeah.
So one of the things we often talk about on this podcast is sustaining your own creative energy or your energy in general. And you know, you touch on that, the fact that you're doing so many different things.
Yeah.
How do you do it? How do you manage that?
Well, I certainly understand that when I was in my 20s, I had a lot more energy than I do now. Even though I'm only really just into my 30s, but still I feel like something has shifted. Maybe I have less energy, or maybe I'm less willing to really burn the candle at both ends, which is what I feel I was doing like a morning shift in one place and then an afternoon shift in another place and then an evening shift somewhere else maybe, and then the next morning the same. It it does wear you out. And yeah, I'm noticing my own tendency to fill all the little gaps that I might have in my day with something productive. And I think maybe that comes from, well, it's like a feeling that, how to put it, when you're a self-employed freelancer, I think you have to be fairly kind of independent and savvy. And I feel like I'm the only one who's got my back. And if I can't work, this is not necessarily true, but that's the feeling that I have. And so there is a pressure, let's say, to look after myself by doing all the million little jobs. And because they are creative and exciting, I maybe don't notice the energy that they do take away. Because at the time, they also give a lot of energy. That was a very long-winded answer.
No, that's so spot on. You know, I resonate with a lot of what you shared now, and yeah, we can take the conversation in so many different directions. I think what struck me is how you said that you don't always notice it in the moment because those things also generate some energy and you enjoy doing them. And then there's the idea of, you know, you're the one that you need to generate the work and the
Yeah.
creativity as well. And on the one hand, wanting to look after yourself, take care of yourself so that it's sustainable. And on the other hand, knowing that you're coming up with all these ideas and, you know, there's things that new things that you can implement all the time. So what are the signs for you? You know, what are the things that you tend to notice that's like a guideline that, okay, perhaps I'm taking on too much, or yeah, what do you usually look out for?
Getting ill, basically, just
Mm-hmm.
starting
Mm-hmm.
to get ill. And I noticed that I I just feel tired in my bones, and it quite often comes upon me quite suddenly, seemingly from one moment to the next. But I think that's also because I don't have that much of a, funnily enough, for a life model, I don't have as good a connection with my body's sort of way of communicating with me than I might like.
Mm-hmm.
It just comes upon me quite suddenly, and I often feel so tired I could cry.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
that's when I know, like, oh crikey, I've bitten off more than I can chew, and I have to strip some things away for a bit.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And
Yeah.
how do you then decide what are the things
Mm.
that you want to let go of for a moment, for a
Yeah.
time?
Well, actually, usually it's modeling that goes first, because I know that, there's plenty of other models in the city and that will happily cover whatever shifts I've got. Um, yeah, so I'll try and I have quite a busy first half of the week, and then in the second half of the week, I do try and keep some days empty. I
Mm-hmm.
realize that I need quite a lot of empty time, um, to kind of garner the energy to go for it in the first half of the week again. So yeah, modeling is always the first thing to go, because I feel like I can be quite easily replaced without too much trouble. Um,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
yeah,
In
yeah.
terms of the logistics, yeah. And
Mm,
then that empty time, what is the purpose of that?
mm.
What do you get out of that?
Well, sleep, for one thing, because quite often I'll work an evening and then sometimes I have an early morning job the next day. And I also have one employed job, which is something for me, which is unusual for me. I've got jobs that I can't say no to. Um,
Mhm.
yeah, seeing friends as well. I realized that takes priority over perhaps going to my studio these days.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, I noticed that the other day. I was like, oh, okay, actually, like hanging out with my friends is, yeah, taking up more of my kind of energy and prioritizing brain space than thinking, oh, I could go to my studio and do some painting. But I
Hmm.
do on a Monday after I've done my kind of employed day job. I just stay on the bus sometimes if I've
Oh,
still got the energy, and just go a couple more stops, instead
ah,
of going home. Because if I go home, then it's quite unlikely I'll leave again. So if I just stay on the bus,
hmm.
get off at the studio, um, and just work until I'm hungry.
Okay.
That's how that's how I sometimes structure my Monday night. It's like, okay, it's
Mm-hmm.
just a couple of hours, and the studio closes at a certain time, so I know that there is a kind of
Mm-hmm.
cutoff point, and that
Mm-hmm.
makes it somehow feel a little bit more sort of small and manageable, and
Mm-hmm.
perhaps not something that's going to turn into this big extra
Mm-hmm.
job. And it can
Mm-hmm.
remain sort of just quite low pressure
Mm-hmm.
fun for me. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And is that what is important to you about that, about it remaining manageable and that it's something that you're doing
Mm.
for yourself?
Well, that's, yeah, funny you should say that. For myself, there was a while where I almost had panic attacks on my way to the studio, even though I forced myself to still go, because it seemed ridiculous to me that they were happening at all. But I feel like I got to the bottom of it in, finding out that there was a large part of me that felt a great amount of pressure to create, um, let's say, to never fail, to never create a shitty piece of work, that every piece had to be the sort of piece that you would want to have on your wall,
Mm.
rather than just a sketch or an investigation or an exploration, which is so ironic because I teach art, and, you know,
Mm.
um, and when I'm teaching, I'm saying all of these very kind of gentle and low pressure things just to get people going and not putting too much pressure on
Mm.
themselves. But there was a huge part of me which is putting a lot of pressure, because I feel like I have in the past made very beautiful things. And I think attached a lot of my self-worth as an artist to how those things were received, and how much people like them.
Mm.
Um, and I couldn't, yeah, at some point I hadn't realized how much pressure that was
Mm.
on me until I started feeling this huge anxiety.
Mm.
Yeah, but I feel much less of that now. I know it's there, and by knowing it's there, I'm able to sort of neutralize it.
Mm.
Um, yeah, it's an interesting one.
Mm. Thanks so much for sharing, Topaz. I think so many people can relate to that. And I think there could be an element, I'm not saying that's the case for you, but often with this kind of thing, anxiety related to creating, there can be a very strong element of shame attached to it. And I think
Yeah.
it's something that we don't talk about.
Mm,
It's easier to share the
mm,
shiny part of who we are and our work as well.
mhm.
But often in the background there's a lot going on.
Yeah, definitely. I know I have certain times of looking at the piles of stuff in my studio, and it's not even big canvases or sculptures or anything. It's mainly just paper, but piles of life drawing. And there are times where I've thought, what is the point of making more when I've got this massive stack already, um,
Mhm.
that it feels like such a tedious task to even try and share with the world. What is the point of adding to that? And I put this rather bleak question on Instagram, and I had I had a lot of people kind of chiming in with their own feelings or maybe their own experiences of similar things, but then also a kind of a reassurance that it's worth. Well, let's think of it for myself. When I see a piece of art that moves me, or that I that strikes me, or that I find arresting or beautiful or engaging, even if it's just on the internet like that, I'm glad it exists to have given me that sort of experience, if you like. And so I was just trying my best to think of my own art in that way. And I guess
Mm.
sharing on the internet, you never know who it's going to reach, but it does reach people. And if there's a few people in the world who have that kind of moment with my art where they think, "Ooh, that's a thing of beauty," or like, "Ooh, that's an inspiring kind of line," or "Hmm," and just spend a moment with it, that's
Mhm.
that's the point. And whether it gets sold or not, whether it sits in my studio
Mm.
for years, is sort of
Mhm.
by the by in a way. Um,
Mhm.
but yeah, it was interesting. I was surprised how many people had gone through the similar kind of feelings.
Mhm. Mhm.
It was very kind of reassuring to have some
Mm.
solidarity.
Yeah. And so you touch on this element of community, whether
Mm.
it's the community that we find on Instagram with other creatives and the people who are actually looking at our work, getting a sense of how they see it, or then meeting in person,
Mm.
what you're actually creating with your live drawing sessions. What's the importance of community to you? You mentioned your friends as well and
Mm.
prioritizing time with
Yeah,
them.
I think it's crucial. um, I grew up in the middle of nowhere, which was very beautiful, but also incredibly isolating, um, and very lonely. And I think now living in a place like Edinburgh, where everywhere is so either walkable or cyclable, And especially in the kind of art community where people just having a name like mine kind of helps in a way.
Sure.
Even if you don't know people, people know who you are, or maybe you'll recognize people's faces from different life drawing groups, or I don't know, there's a
Mm,
sense of familiarity across a lot of different circles. I feel like well, sometimes when I travel, I go life modeling in different cities, and um, I'd feel at home in that kind of crowd, even if I'm new to
mm,
the place or the room,
mm,
to the tutor, whoever. There's
mhm,
that kind of sense of familiar form and routine that makes me feel at home. Um, yeah, and everybody, maybe sneaks off to their own studio or does their own art in their own private little bubble, whatever it may be. But it's yeah, you can't be alone forever. At some point, it's
mm,
just nice to share where you're at and what you're doing.
mm,
Um,
mhm,
yeah, I get a lot out of being around people, even if we're
mm,
just parallel doing our own thing. Like when my studio mates come in and they're in their own space in the studio, and maybe we'll say to each other, "Look, I'd like to just get on with things, so I'm not going to chat much." Just to communicate that, but to have a person there who's in parallel doing their own thing is a lovely thing. And there's just, I mean, when it comes to Reconfigure, sometimes when I'm standing at the top of the room and looking across everybody's work, and at the start of the session, when I see like 60 blank pieces of paper, I think like, wow. Yeah. And there's a tremendous energy in the room and a tremendous focus in the room when everybody is sort of
mm,
getting on with it, if you like,
mhm,
that maybe you
mhm,
find more motivation for by going to the thing than you
mhm,
do if you're just kind of trying to self-motivate by yourself. I mean, I definitely
mhm.
feel that for me. Like it keeps my own drawing practice going that maybe would otherwise fall by the wayside.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I can attest to that collective energy in this space when you're doing something together.
Mm.
But I think part of that and part of the success of specifically Reconfigure has something to do with you and who you are and how you set up the space, how you curated the intro you do in the beginning and then the mindfulness breathing practice. It feels very intentional, and it feels like there's a lot
Mm.
of care that go into it. And I think for me as a participant, I also feel that there's care being taken. The model is also being taken care of, and that probably comes from your
Mm.
own experience being a life model. But that is
Hmm.
that is what I sense. There's a lot of
Oh,
care, and
thank you.
so I wanted to ask you about the specifically the breathing practice, the mindfulness practice.
Uh,
When did you start doing that? And
yeah,
yeah,
I did a lot of
what's the importance
yoga.
of that for you? Mm.
Well, yeah. So I'm a sort of perpetually late person, including when I go to yoga classes. It seems so ridiculous. Like you go and you arrive in an absolute tiz to the place where you're supposed to do some chilling out.
Mm.
Um, and so for me, when the teacher starts the session with a few moments of just sort of settling down, I really appreciate that moment to just sort of arrive. And
Mm.
I thought, hang on a minute, there's probably quite a lot of people who come to Reconfigure, and there is a quite a sort of unsettled energy at the start, with so many people coming into the space and like finding their place, and depending how sort of comfortable the people feel to be there, especially if they're kind of new, um, there can be this kind of energy that hasn't quite sort of grounded. Um,
Mm. Mhm.
and so I thought it's an amazing thing to have so many people in the room. And as I said before, the kind of the power of the energy of so many people has great potential. So I thought, why don't I just start bringing the kind of the yoga vibe, for
Nice.
want of a better word, into the Reconfigure room. And I can tell you that when I first did it, I was like shaking, and I was so glad to be at the back of the space because I went beetroot red because it was new
So uncomfortable, so
to me. Yeah.
unusual, yeah.
And I was quite concerned that people shouldn't find it woo, if you like,
Mm-hmm.
and that it should actually be quite a physical, quite a practical thing. But gradually, I have started to sort of insert a small amount of pep talk in the start as well, because I think, I mean, it won't resonate with everybody, but there might be just a few people in the room for whom that kind of really strikes a chord. And I know that it does happen because sometimes they come and tell me. It's like when, like for example, when I'm teaching sometimes these workshops for, I call them art phobes. Um, how how do I encourage a person to tune in with their own sense of bravery?
Mm-hmm.
Um, what kind of invitations can I make that will encourage someone to sort of to tune in with that the part of them that believes in themselves. And then also it's an opportunity for everybody to be more present. And so sometimes I want to highlight that. Sometimes I'm thinking about how drawing is practicing being in connection with your intuition moment to moment. And sometimes I want to highlight that. Sometimes I want to highlight that nervousness and excitement are very close to each other. If there's people feeling nervous in the room, can they nudge that ever so slightly into the kind of excitement territory? And lately, I've been asking people to imagine what their ideal art teacher would say to reassure them and encourage some bravery in them. So whether they had that person in their life or not, what would that person say to them? Like maybe they'll say, it's just a piece of paper, or they'll say, you did it before, you can do it again, or like whatever that may be. Because I think some people didn't have that encouraging voice, or maybe they even had a discouraging voice. And that can have a huge impact. Yeah. So everybody will have different needs in that moment. So I can't, it's a way for someone to think of for themselves, what is it that I need to hear? Can I speak it to myself? As a way to sort of set the intention for the session, if you like. Yeah. Or it can just be like, I don't know, just see what happens, make a mess. But maybe for some people it means more than just having a go. Maybe it means reconnecting with a part of themselves that they've neglected. So I'm aware that there's a lot of different kind of levels that people are on in the room, and I want to honor that in a way. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think you create a very, very, very inviting space. That's
Thank you.
certainly how I've experienced it. And so you're talking about connecting with, in some way, connecting with that inner mentor that, instead of hearing this critical voice, connecting with this strong sense of self. And you support others with doing that for themselves. How do you connect with that part of yourself as a freelancer and someone doing so many different things?
It's funny because I know that for a lot of people, they couldn't imagine for themselves having done what I have done. And likewise for me, I can't imagine having done what they have done. And what I mean is like having left university and not immediately found myself a kind of career path, or let's say a career path that was defined by someone else. But oddly enough, it was never it just didn't even cross my mind
Mm,
as something that I should be aiming towards or that I wanted. Um,
mhm,
and Reconfigure came sort of quite soon after I graduated, and it's this sort of sustained me financially and also brought me into a community for all this time. And I feel incredibly kind of secure in it, I guess. Uh, I've forgotten the first half of that question now. I've gone off on a little tangent.
that's
Yeah, no,
okay.
it's gone.
Yeah, I was asking about how you connect with that part of you that feels the inner mentor. Mm.
I have a funny sense that whatever happens, it's all gonna be okay. Um, a feeling that whatever kind of door you open or whatever path you take, it might kind of take you a little bit longer, but you will always end up where you're supposed to be.
Mhm.
Uh, yeah, I don't have a feeling of being on the wrong path ever.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, even if it it I don't even if it's maybe not clear to me where something is going. Um, for example, I was in the Red Kite, which is a great local cafe for
Yes.
anyone who's not familiar. And they had an ad in the window saying part-time baker needed. And I thought, I've got a bit of spare time. I can bake a
Nice.
cake. I'm going to apply. And I did. And the owner at the time took a punt on my lemon tarts, and I got the job. Um, and that was a really nice kind of separate from my art world creative job for a time. Just I
Mhm.
don't know, just alone in the kitchen making delicious sweet treats. Um, and off the back of that, I got a job at Garvold, which is
Mhm.
an organization that supports adults with intellectual disabilities in their own
Mhm.
creative workshops. So I
Mhm.
work in the confectionery, which bakes cakes and biscuits. I was like, oh, well, that red kite job
Oh.
wasn't maybe so tangential after all.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
and another thing that's kind of in the back of my mind, and it's been in the back of my mind for a long time, is the potential of doing a degree in art psychotherapy.
Mm.
And to do so, they need you to have 1,000 hours of experience in a kind of caring role, or a role where you're sort of in a, as I understand it, in a power dynamic of sorts.
Mhm.
Um, and so the garbled job is a sort of potential stepping stone for that.
Mhm.
Um,
Mm.
yeah. So one thing always leads to another. Nothing is ever really
Mhm.
meaningless as far as I can see. Like everything is
Mhm.
always, even if it feels totally random, it always is relevant at some point in the end, even if you don't know it at the time.
Mhm.
And so I suppose I have a trust that things will always kind of slot into place. Um, yeah, that's just the
Mhm.
feeling that I have.
Sure. What I'm hearing from you is just a sense of openness, um, both in terms of what you're picking up in your environment, like the
Mm,
ad at the
hmm
Red Kite Cafe, but then also on a deeper level, an openness for something to unfold, some possibility, something that you couldn't have planned, but then took you in a certain direction,
hmm hmm
and that sense of trust as well, which I think is an
mm
anchor. It provides that anchor and that belief that everything, you're on the right path.
hmm Yeah.
And also intuition. You mentioned intuition with the life drawing and the drawing in
mm
general, but it sounds like
hmm
there's a sense of intuition in terms of how you make decisions as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I think so. I mean, I know that if I ever feel in a kind of stuck limbo, that I can talk it out, and that's, I've got a great support network in that way. But yeah, for some reason, I've never felt stuck. At least not yet in my life.
Mm.
Yeah. I mean, for example, I studied linguistics, and perhaps if I had waited after school with, given myself some time and not sort of jumped straight on the uni bandwagon, I would have studied art. But I, I wanted to get a sensible job, at the time, and I felt like art would always be with me, and that I didn't have to
Mm.
study it per se for it to be a meaningful presence in my
Mhm.
life.
Mhm.
Although now that it forms so much of what I do, I think it would have been kind of handy to have studied it. But
Mm.
yeah, there isn't a sense of stuckness. I guess I sort of follow my nose moment to
Mm.
moment. Mm.
Mhm. Sure, we've spoken about so many things, and I'm trying to think what else I need to ask, and maybe before I ask anything else, is there anything you want to share perhaps that I didn't ask that that's come up for you in our conversation?
Hmm. Hmm. Feels like I mean, it's got so much potential, that question. Hmm. It feels too big.
Okay. That's fine. You can you
Yeah,
can sit with it. Maybe something comes to you later. And then it's just for you. Um, Thank you so much, Topaz.
my pleasure.
Your name relates to this. Now I'm totally going to not find the right word, but what the emerald diamond.
Yeah,
What's the word to
it's a
this? Yeah, a
gemstone.
gem. Yes,
Yeah.
yes, yes, yes. A gem
Hmm.
where depending on how you move it, the light reflects in a certain way. And
Mm.
in just our conversation, I have that sense that there's so many different aspects and elements to who you are, and I'm very grateful that I got to have this conversation with you to understand a little bit more about your background, your history, your journey, actually, and what has led you to this place where we're meeting in this space and this time. Um, is there any advice that you would offer to someone who's
Mm.
perhaps at the starting point of trying something new, something different, where you were perhaps 10 years ago,
Mm.
knowing what you know now, what kind of
Mm.
advice would you offer?
I mean, as I've kind of mentioned and as I've seen for myself, one thing always leads to another. So you don't necessarily need to start at the most overwhelming sort of point of your ideas or project. Like small is good.
Mm,
And I think a lot depends on who you meet as well. Like it's
mhm,
very difficult for things just to happen in a vacuum. Um, yeah, going and finding some kind of like-minded group, or even yeah, just paying attention to those sort of things maybe that seem like coincidence or chance when you
mhm,
bump into somebody or you have an interesting conversation, just like maybe being open and attuned to following following a thread that interests you.
mhm,
Um, yeah, I mean, there's plenty of areas of my life where I feel very a beginner, and sometimes it's difficult to remember that you start like, because I feel like I've been an artist all my life, so sometimes I have to remember that I need to put myself way back, um, in someone who's the shoes of someone who's really, really just starting out. But yeah, just start small, start very, very small, in the least overwhelming way possible,
mhm, mhm,
and build on that.
mhm. Mm. I'm reminded of a poem by I think it's David Whyte. where I think the theme of the poem is about beginning, and that you start with the smallest step, the step that's
Mm.
closest. It's a beautiful poem, and it made me think
Mhm.
of that. He describes that beautifully, that the thing that's the closest to you, just start with
Mm.
that small step. I think that's a
Mhm.
beautiful message. Yeah.
Mhm. Find some way of making it actively appealing. So, like at some point it will become actively appealing, but I I think there can be a lot of resistance. So if there is a way to kind of to make whatever activity it is that you're wanting to begin into some kind of pleasure,
Mm-hmm.
then it will become much more appealing. Yeah.
Seek the joy.
Mhm.
Joy. Yeah.
Mhm. Definitely.
Thanks
Yeah.
so much, Topaz. I loved our conversation. I appreciate your
Thank
time.
you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.